That's all I will inundate you with for now, because we've got a really awesome lineup of whiskeys to sample through tonight. Uh, Everything we've got here is over 30 years of age. They're all 31 years of age and up. And as much as it was just kind of a fun idea to do a tasting for that, because the store is now 31 years of age, really it was just an excuse to pour some really cool Gordon MacPhail whiskeys. When we first had the idea for tonight's tasting, I'll be honest, we hadn't thought about it being an exclusively Gordon MacPhail tasting. But then we started looking around and very quickly realized there was not a lot of other 31-year-old whiskeys to be had, or 32. The pickings were slim. So we started looking, and I put a bug in James's ear about this, and we made sure to tuck aside a few bottles before they sold out, just to make sure that we could put this on. And that's how it came about. And we are joined tonight by Richard Urquhart, who's one of the fourth generation family members who own and run Gordon MacPhail. And he has been kind enough to join us at an ungodly hour. Richard, thank you for joining us tonight, and apologies in advance to your family if any of them wake up as a result of this.
No, I'm out in the garden, so they can't hear me and they won't wake up. My daughter will probably be up by the time I get back in anyway, so it's all good. I'll be up before her for once. But thank you, Andrew, for having me back. It's always great to be back virtually in Canada. It's nice to be in Canada, so hopefully later in the year we'll do one in person as well. And thanks to everyone else for being here as well. Got some great whiskies to try tonight.
Mm-hmm. So Richard, we talked about this before we got started tonight. I expect most people here will know a little bit about Gordon MacPhail, but if you wanted to maybe give them the Coles Notes version before we dig in, and then we can sprinkle some more out as we go, because some of the whiskeys in tonight's lineup are actually intricately tied to the history of the company and your family running it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the first tasting I've done since our 128th anniversary, which was a few days ago on the 24th of May. So we're now 128 years old as a whiskey business. We were founded as a grocer and a whiskey blender back in 1895, and we've been maturing and bottling whiskies for that entire time. So one thing will repeat throughout tonight is what we actually do, which is match spirit, oak, and time. So we fill our own casks that we have sourced from Spain or the US with brand new spirit from distilleries throughout Scotland. And that's why we have probably the largest aged portfolio of Scotch whisky in the world, because we've been laying down new casks, laying down new smoked spirit into our casks for 128 years. And that means we have stock from over 100 distilleries, aging from the 1940s up to casks we filled last week. And that's something that we've continued to do year after year. The great thing about Scotch whisky is it's an aged product. That's also the downside. It takes time to make the product. But all these whiskies we're trying tonight were all filled before I joined the business. But I'm the one that gets to sit here talking about it as a whiskey release today. So for us, it's we're a fourth generation family business, and it's a nice thing for us to do is always get to try whiskies which were filled by generations before us.
Sorry, I had the wrong keyboard, so I had to run upstairs to grab the one that was actually paired with my laptop. Anyway, kind of out of breath from sprinting through the house. We've got the Highland Park to start out with here, and I can pull that up on our website. Now, Richard, over the years, I don't remember seeing a lot of Highland Park being bottled by Gordon MacPhail.
It used to be one of our biggest sellers, but we used to bottle a lot of it as an 8-year-old under our MacPhail's collection range. It won Best Bang for Your Buck in the year 2000 in the US. And so we have old Highland Parks that will be coming out kind of even older than these ones, or this one, but it is very, very limited. We did consume a lot of stock as a younger product over the years. So.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? For me, I really love this American oak when it gets over kind of, as it gets that more tropical flavor profile, which you really get with this Highland Park.
Yeah, no, it is very tropical on the nose. So refill American oak. This is a style, and I know, Gordon MacPhail has some of the best sherry matured whiskeys out there. Refill, especially American oak for me, is one of my favorite styles as it gets to an age like 30, late 20s, early 30s. And yeah, this Highland Park is like incredibly fruity, very tropical. That's got that classic kind of creamed honey heather note in there as well, and a little whiff of smoke, like really, really faint, clean smoke.
Yeah.
Kurt, do you want to share any tasting notes on this one?
This is right in my wheelhouse. You know that. It's creamy, it's elegant. I like that really kind of toasty note that's there. Really, really heavy honey in this for me. It's kind of like old school Highland Park used to be, minus maybe a little bit of the sherry. And this is definitely more in my wheelhouse than that with it.
I mean, nice bit of kind of marshmallow, that kind of sweetness coming through. Some of the oldest whiskies we've ever matured have been in American oak, as well, kind of old transfer casks, and that kind of mango and pineapple you get coming through here is something that I pick up in all these really old American oak casks we have as well. Because it's a small cask, we're getting that same flavor profile, just a little bit early, well, at half the age.
There's a little bit more spice here, and of course that little bit of smoke, but otherwise this is really close to that Conval 20 more or Conval 28 we had a few years back, Andrew. Really, really clean and toasty.
Yeah, that's it, especially on the nose. That's a really good call. Like those tropical notes are kind of tangy. Oh man.
Outstanding.
Yeah, that's got a real nice old school feel to it on the palate. The flavors are there. It has all those hallmarks of like a really good old whiskey, and none of the baggage that can sometimes come with the oak kind of adding a little bit of a bitterness in there.
I think you probably agree with me, Andrew. It's been sort of hard to love Highland Park for the last few years. So this is kind of like one of those, oh, this is what it should be. This is what it can be, right?
Well, I mean, and that's a good point to talk about here too. Like the Highland Park 25 and 30, which used to be staples in the market, are now infrequently available at best. And looking here again at like 32-year-old 1988 Highland Park in a gorgeous cask strength single cask, at the price point this is coming out at, it's probably under what the 30-year, well under what the 30-year from Highland Park is going for now, and frankly is good value. This is one of those ones that's been a bit of a sleeper on the shelf. I know we sold some to some guys last month that are big Highland Park fans, but I think, when people think Gordon MacPhail and older whiskeys, they think sherry. That seems to be the direction that they go in, because G&M's just got such a great variety of old sherried whiskeys. And by old, I mean anything from the 20s and up. And I think there's some guys out there who have blinders on, and they're not even looking at whiskeys like this because maybe it's not dark enough for them. And it's really quite a shame, because you just get such nice, elegant, delicate spirit character shine through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of our old whiskies over 30, 40 years old are sherry, because that's what we fill for long-term maturation. We still have some of these remade American hogsheads that will come through the portfolio every year. We do this amazing Glentauchers in 1979 and a remade American hogshead, same type of cask, it's a bit more aged than this one. And again, you just get this really nice, I just love that kind of tropical sweetness that comes through there. A little bit of oakiness you get there as well. So, I mean, for us, it's always about getting that balance between the spirit and the oak. So when we look at a spirit character, we want to match it with a type of cask for a length of time that will give us the right balance. So you can still taste that distillery character, but you get that nice kind of complementary cask character as well. The other thing with our releases is we never try and compete with brand owners. We try and complement what they do by offering something different, either through age or maturation, or by doing it as a single cask rather than set strength. And today we find a lot of our releases now are all single casks. It also makes them more unique that way as well. This is a one of one cask. Once this cask is gone, we will never have another cask exactly the same as that cask again. There'll be similar ones, but it will just be never exactly the same as what we have here tonight.
Yeah. The more I let this one sit with me, the more I'm blown away by it. And I don't know if it's just me, but like it seems like the smoke is actually fairly robust in this one for a whiskey of this age, especially on the palate. I'm finding like I'm really picking up two things. It's smoke, but I'm also picking up like a nice spice, warming spice tone too.
There's something about the nose of this that reminds me of walking into the pot still in Glasgow. Just the cumulative nose on it.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very cool release. Yeah, Highland Park, as Kurt said, not something that we see a lot of mature bottlings of anymore. We do have another Gordon MacPhail. I think we still have another Gordon MacPhail Highland Park in the shop, or at least we did recently. Kurt, didn't we have one from like
84?
84, right?
Oh, and a 95, right?
Yeah, the 95, which came and went, like was a huge huge hit, did not last. But yeah,
It
there
will
was
be back.
that the 95, it will be back, but I believe in very small quantities. So maybe best not to get everyone's hopes too high on that one.
Yeah,
Or-
there's no more in Scotland, so whatever's on the water is all we've got that one coming. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean,
This is sorry, Richard, I'm just going to quickly
yeah.
show, this is the 1984 release that's also out there from the private collection. And based on our inventory, we're down to 1 or 2 bottles of it. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the Pulteney?
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So, Pulteney is one of the whiskies that we used to bottle under a label from the distillery itself. So you see some of our old Mortlach or Linkwood labels we sold today, and Longmorn and other distilleries. Old Pulteney was one of the ones that we did up until a couple of years ago. But because we try and complement and not compete with brand owners, we have to be very respectful as well. And in this case, we came to an agreement not to use their labels anymore, but to bottle it either under Connoisseur's Choice or under our private collection. So this was a worldwide release, this one. So I only got a few bottles for my region, for the US and Canada predominantly. We do have a sister cast coming out this year, so we'll get the whole cast coming to North America. But yeah, this is just a greatly aged Pulteney, which again, there's not too much of that in the market either.
Mhm.
There's only 69 bottles of this one available. 40 years old, 54.9% ABV. Yeah. And there's a refill American Hogshead again, so it's going to be quite similar to what we just had, but you can see by the color it's a little bit darker and richer. This is that kind of evolution of cask influences kind of move forward. And this is probably where you're going to get much more of that kind of tropical flavor profile coming through.
I always have to stop myself because we so seldom see independent bottlings of Pulteney whiskey. And because of the distillery labels, we're always accustomed to saying Old Pulteney. But as your bottling shows, and as people know, like there's no Old Pulteney distillery, it's just Pulteney distillery. And it's funny, I think we've probably even labeled things in the past as like independent bottler, Old Pulteney, and then someone's going to call us on a technical detail, like you can't put the old there.
And with our labeling agreements, we have to say it's from the distillery name. So in this case, from Pulteney Distillery, we can't say it's from Pulteney. It's got to be Pulteney Distillery or Glentauchers Distillery and so on. Just to make sure we follow, have compliant labels.
Really rich honey tones on the nose on this. It's creamier than the last one. It doesn't really go into that, just looking at the color, like you'd be tempted to think it's going to go into like dark fruits and things like that, but it's not. It's staying more in the tropical tones,
Yeah.
decadent spices and big sugar.
Apricot. I mean, that's for me, just that kind of sweetness coming through there.
Yeah, like apricot or fig jam. Kurt, what do you got?
Yeah, I love that apricot note. It's a little bit bubblegummy too. There's like bird's custard. There's a little bit of like white chocolate, a little bit of peach and melon. And then if anybody has crept ahead on the palate, wow. That's all I can say. Wow.
Oh yeah. Kurt, that reminds me of some of those Glen Glaza, like 40-plus-year-old Glen Glazas from about a decade ago.
Yes. That little 3-pack, remember that guy?
Mhm.
Oh man,
I've still got one.
you're lucky, man. Oh man, like that tangy tropical thing going on the palate there, like passion fruit and tangerine and guava and like all of those kind of fruits. That's
It's still got the figs and the apricots, but it is definitely going way tropical on the palate. Really tangy, creamy. And I also love that sort of integration of that nice salty maritime kick in it too. Now, Richard, I'm guessing Gordon MacPhail, like, would these casks would probably have been in Elgin most of their lives as opposed to at the distillery, or would they have been up at the distillery?
They probably would have started at the distillery, looking at when they were filled, and then they would come back into Elgin maybe at 10 or 12 years old, rough approximately. I'd have to double check, kind of go back to some ledgers to find out, but initially it probably would have been on site at the distillery, and then laterally it would have been in our warehousing. So all the old casks are back either in our warehousing in Elgin or in Forest at Benham Distillery. So we have to make sure we can't keep all our old casks in one location now. The value is too high, and we have insurance companies making sure that we mitigate risk by having them spread out. But a lot of the casks we have on site distilleries is always the young casks. Because we fill our own casks, we know the maturation we should get from those casks. So it's almost, we don't need to see them in the first few years. It's more when they get older, we want to have them back in our control, and in terms of back and under our roof, to make sure that we can look after them the right way.
Yeah. One question, one point that I want to bring up before we go too far. The question, and Richard, I suspect you may not be able to answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. The question was posed by James. Is G&M currently filling any casks from Pulteney or any other Inverhouse distilleries?
We're not filling Pulteney, but I'm not sure about other distilleries. That's not something my brother tells me. But no, Pulteney is not one that we're filling right now. Because
you do, like, you have had a history, like a fairly long history of bottling Bell Blair as well.
Yeah. So I'd have, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I'd have to double check, but I know for Pulteney, definitely we're not filling that one. But we may be filling some of the other distilleries, but I'd have to go and check.
But I mean, I guess the other comment, or I guess the sort of follow-up to that would be, even if you're not bottling them now, that's not to say that might change in the future, because the industry goes through cycles. I know a lot of distilleries right now are, holding back stock because they're worried about India opening up, and then what happens if that happens. And I think that's kind of crazy, because they've been talking about that now for 10 years, and it doesn't seem any closer than it was 10 years ago. But Gordon MacPhail's an old company, and old companies think in long time increments, and things change, and I guess companies sometimes need cash flow. And it's not to say that you may not be filling it now, but not that you wouldn't be filling it again at some point down the line.
Yeah, you can't predict the future. You can't predict what changes may happen. As a business, though, we kind of build our business now on the fact that we know we probably will lose more fillings than we will gain, which is why we bought Mortlach back in the 1990s. That's why we built our brand new distillery and opened it last year. That being said, the other thing to think about with our portfolio is, because we're filling new make, let's just say we did a Pulteney 15-year-old or the 21-year-old that we used to do. We lose our fillings for that distillery. It'd be 21 years before we could stop doing the 21-year-old, because we fill casks every year to be that product. We may change what that product will become once changes happen, but in reality, we have time in our hands to adapt the portfolio and change our strategy, because we have a warehouse that's full of whiskey that we keep adding more back into, rather than just trying to buy mature whiskey. And that's probably the key thing about Gordon MacPhail. It doesn't make us any better. I'm not saying it makes us better than everybody else. And that's for consumers. That's for you all to decide about the quality of our whiskies. But we feel by filling our own casks, we can control the quality of what we want to put out there. It also means we can have that kind of longevity, because we know what we'll have next year. We know what we'll have the next 15 years because that's already in our warehouse maturing.
Mhm. And that's a perfect segue into a comment that someone else made, I guess a question about how is this 57% after 38 years? And I think that goes back to, again, the quality of your own casks and not just simply relying on buying filled casks from distilleries is your
Yeah.
own wood.
Absolutely. I mean, my grandfather's saying was a good cask makes a good whiskey. So it's all about the quality of the cask. For us, by filling the right type of cask, the right purpose. So every cask we fill has a destiny. So we know the cask we fill today could be a Mortlach 15-year-old, it could be a generation's 8-year-old or even older. That's all that fate, as my brother calls it, already been decided. But it can change over time if we feel cask is maturing faster or slower than we expect. But by using our own cask, we kind of know how that should, how the maturation should work.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's pretty impressive. And you know, Richard, several people have already commented here. What's really become apparent, and you can't say this, but I'm happy to say it, is over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, especially, it's become very apparent how good the wood quality that Gordon MacPhail is using is, and kind of setting a gold standard for sherry casks. What you've done with Ben Romick, same thing. And, you know, for a lot of companies, there's a hyperbole about, you know, we only source the finest wood. And, you know, there may be some truth in that, but it's how you guys look at and treat the wood, specifying thicker staves, you know, specifying a longer seasoning rather than just a speed seasoning so that you can get those casks as quickly as possible and fill them. It's all part of a long-term vision. And I think it's paid off. And I, you know, really hope you guys, and I have no doubt that you will, hold the course on that, because you're kind of setting yourselves in your own brands, you know, a level above what almost anybody else is doing out there.
Yeah, well, I think for us, it's always about, we look to the future, but we sell what was done in the past. So the wood that we're filling today in these casks here were done, what, 3 decades ago. I was not even old enough to drink. There will be many years before I can say, yes, I was old enough to drink 30 years ago. But for us, that quality of the cask, but it's what I was going to make before, about the fact we don't lose as much strength. The cask in our main warehouse in Elgin is packed quite tightly together. The way my brother describes this is, it's think about putting a block of ice in a glass. It will melt really, really quickly. You fill the whole tumbler, the whole glass full of ice, and they all help keep each other cool, and the ice will stay as ice for a lot longer. And with this warehouse being racked and the casks being quite closely on top of each other, it helps kind of control the humidity and temperature. And we don't find we get the same losses in that warehouse as we do in some of our other warehouses we have within the companies today. So that kind of effect means we've managed to mature whiskey. Yeah, so this one obviously being over 54% at 40 years. I mean, there's a good chance this was filled at a higher strength than 63.5, because you'd expect to lose a lot more than 9% over kind of well, in this case 40 years. So
yeah, I mean, Richard, you say that, but then we've also tried and seen a lot of other G&M bottlings over time that have held their strength better, because again, it's those thicker staves, like that's all going to play a part.
Yeah, and that's what we can do today. But with a remade hogshead, this was just American oak ex-bourbon cask shipped across from the US and then remade into a hogshead in Scotland. So this is this been one that we changed the stave thickness. This is just would have been a cask that was made bigger in Scotland, because we want to get more whiskey in our warehouses, and you get the same number of barrels and hogsheads. Which you can have Scottish mentality, try and save a few quid every now and again to get save building warehouses. But one thing about these American oak hogsheads, these won't always be available, because today we don't buy staves from the US. We buy intact casks. So these remade hogsheads will start to die away, particularly in our portfolio. We have a set wood policy where we use our casks a maximum of twice for Gordon MacPhail. There's only once for Ben Romick, and for a new distillery, it's a mixture of first fill and refill. So first and second fill. So after we use this cask here, there's no life for our use of these casks, so we'll pass them on to our cooperage, or we'll do something else with them, but it won't be for Scotch whiskey.
Mhm. This is pure speculation, but 1982 is like at the kind of genesis of the whiskey industry crash of the 1980s. Maybe the cooper just had a bit more time on his hands, and he was able to like really ensure that cask was remade very well.
Yeah.
Harry, I saw you just joined us. I put the link in the chat. We just finished the Pulteney. I'm sure you can catch up to us. But on that note, Richard, let's jump on to the Mortlach 1989. This one's been quite a popular dram. And I think this is one where maybe it might be worth taking a minute or two to talk about Gordon MacPhail's history, because with the next two whiskeys, Mortlach and Linkwood, they're distilleries that you've had a very, very long history with.
Yeah, so we started bottling Mortlach in 1896, so a year after we opened our doors. That's when we started to bottle it under license from the distillery. So our history came from being a grocer who blended teas, coffees, and whiskey, to being a licensed bottler for distilleries in the local area. So above our shop in Elgin, which is where we started, and we still have our shop, is temporarily closed down for a year while we have to do some work to the outside of the shop, and then we're refurbing the inside of the shop to make it more about the Gordon MacPhail kind of history and heritage. But on the first floor of that shop, there used to be offices where distilleries used to rent an office to do all their banking and all their kind of in-town tasks from that. So it used to be quite interesting going to the top of that floor in the shop, and every office had a letterbox because it was always rented out to an individual distillery. So with distilleries renting space in the same building as we were in, for a company try something a bit different, we became a licensed bottler, and Mortlach was probably one of the first distilleries we became had a license to use their original distillery label. And even today we can still use Mortlach's original label. So we do a 15-year-old, we do a 25-year-old, and then the rest of the bottlings now come through either Connoisseur's Choice or Connoisseur's Choice Upper, like this one here, or Private Collection, or even Generations. So the oldest Mortlach we've bottled so far has been 75 years old. It was from 1939, and that was our last ever cask in the 1930s. And it was bottled, we'll say about 6-7 years ago now. 8 years ago, in fact. So Mortlach is obviously known as the Beast of Dufftown. Heavy, oily, a slightly meaty influence coming through there. And that heavy spirit is one that we've been able to mature for 75 years so far, because it can stand up to a lot of that cask influence. When we look at long-term maturation, we don't want it to just be about the cask and the age. It's going to be about that balance I mentioned before. So Mortlach gives us the ability that we can actually use the right type of cask, the right length of time, but still keep that Mortlach kind of character coming through there, even after 7 decades.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm gonna actually, I'm just quickly tweaking the poll here for when we get to that. I know that's still down a ways down, but I'm going to pull this one up on the screen again. This is I gotta change my browser. Here we go. The Mortlach 1989. 1989 was a pretty good year in Calgary. Some of you may know that's the year the Flames won the Stanley Cup. So, sure, it was only 30 odd years ago, but we've not forgotten. I can't find. I got too many windows open here. All right, I'll share my screen in a second. But Kurt, you want to lead us out? What are you nosing on this one?
I love these tastings where you get super stoked for the first one, and then the second one kind of seems to up the ante, and then the third one goes even further. Normally I'm really, really sweet on the experiment, but this is killing it for me. I just scribbled down some notes real quick. This has got like that old note. It's kind of hard to put your fingers on. It's like chocolate covered fruit, grilled meat with a berry reduction, old polished wood and paint, chocolate and rum, a little bit of twiglets, and tobacco wrapped around licorice.
So just a couple notes jumped off your head there.
Just a couple. You can have your nose in this forever. This is amazing.
Yeah, loads of tobacco, dark fruits, kind of getting into treacle and maybe even a bit of like sticky toffee pudding on the nose.
Yeah, I used this whiskey for a tasting in New York a few weeks ago, and it was just went down so well. The richness, the viscosity is just a great representation of some. Well, this is where I gotta say it's not even greatly aged in the Gordon MacPhail standards. We're only talking about 30 odd years here, and that's quite young for Gordon MacPhail. That's the thing we get carried away with at times, that because it's only 30 years old, but for so many other companies, 30 years old is a massive milestone to get to, in terms of aging Scotch whiskey. But we have that kind of full warehouse full of whiskey still maturing, well over 80 years now. So yeah, so I call this a young Mortlach, not an old Mortlach.
Richard, before I go further on this, James is asking, he's appreciating the tasting notes. Who does them?
So that is my brother, and so my brother, twin brother, works in business. Some of you may have, if you've been to Scotland, may have met him. He looks like me without the beard, but his job is to run our distilleries, run our filling contracts, all our supply chain, and his whiskey supply team will write our tasting notes. So we basically have a flavor wheel, and then we extrapolate the different taste notes coming out from there as well. So I always quite like to critique my brother's work because I'm a nice guy, and he's not here to defend his tasting notes. So he's telling me he gets rich brown sugar and stewed apples, lead to cherries, raisins, alongside subtle touch of honey and ginger. It's not his worst one, I have to say. It's pretty accurate. Sometimes we get some quite strange ones coming through, but that's not always down to him, because after he writes them and his team or one of his team writes them, it goes to our marketing team, who then feel the need to change language to make it a bit more colorful. And sometimes that can be quite interesting when you travel the world trying to explain what different terminology means. Like Palmer violets, when I used to go to China, never came across the same way as it was meant to back in Scotland. So yeah, so there's a small team in the office will write the kind of basic taste note, and then our brand team will then try and add to that.
No.
I don't say too much. They're getting recorded on this, aren't we? So I need to.
The palette on this is reminding me of like old Glendronachs, like kind of late 80s, maybe some earlier ones too. It's not as meaty as I'd expected. Like that meaty Mortlach character is not coming through. It's like tropical, treacle, chocolate and tobacco are kind of the tones for me. Kurt, what have you got?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it's a little bit meatier on the nose than on the palate, but I think it's just the hallmark of incredible casking, because a ton of Mortlach goes into sherry, and I think that big meaty meatiness with sherry always lends to that barbecue savory meatiness, like even deeper. When the sherry's a little bit cleaner like this, a little bit more elegant, a little bit more aged, it shows prettier, and the meatiness kind of changes out a little bit. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's somewhat reminiscent to me of like some of those older Strathilas too, the G&M Strathilas, like the 40, which used to be like almost a core release from Gordon MacPhail for ages. That Strathila 40 year. I think I've still got one tucked away somewhere. Maybe, and this is going off on a tangent, Richard, but when like is Strathilas something that's been a consistent filling in recent decades? Because we've stopped seeing some of those like 30-40-year-old. We've seen the odd one come out.
Yeah. So I mean, looking at different parcels of stock, we don't release. In the old days, we used to maintain a price list, a product list. We used to refer to it as the price list of disappointment, because everything was out of stock, because you tried to maintain a few bottles of everything over 10 years or so, and it meant it was sold through too quickly. So now the strategy is we just do focus a lot more on single casks, which means we'll look at which casks, well, my brother will look at which cask he feels is ready to be released, and then he'll give us a selection of about 300 to 400 casks a year that will either bottlers, Conscious Choice, or private collection, or some of the older kind of generations, I guess, eventually as well. And that will be that will vary. So, for example, there's a Strathila 1982 coming out in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. I think, did I leave that on the product list for you earlier, James? I can't remember.
I was going to say, can I just go on the record and confirm our allocation right now?
If you want it all, you can have it all. You're the first one to come back. So, but yeah, so So what you and it's recorded. I can't go back on it now either. So yeah, so
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
With these old casks and the way our portfolio structure is working now, it will vary year after year. So some years it may be more interesting distilleries in terms of being less well known will be there. Some big names will be there as well. It's all about trying to maintain release casks when they're at their peak. So, for example, the Pulteney cask we tried, the sister cask is just getting bottled this year. We've got that style 82. We've got a whole rack of closed distilleries coming out again this year. We just did a coronation whiskey that was from 1948 for King Charles. I mean, the range is pretty big, and this strategy of single cask means that we have lots of unique releases coming out all the time. So looking at what else we have coming out this year, it's a Benrina 78, so a bit different. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of different stuff coming out, so it's hard to say we don't have the same selection. It's just different now because we do them all as single casks.
Kurt, you like 1978, right?
I was just thinking, Richard, you could probably scoop some help from Andrew and I doing some cask sampling for those 78s to make sure they're.
Yeah, we want to make sure the quality is still up here. So
Well,
You
Andrew,
will be in our
that,
sample room later in a few weeks, so we'll make sure we can get some samples out for you there. But then, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, but another whiskey we had coming out, or just came out, is a 1982 from Glenburgie, but it was bottled under Gordon MacPhail, not under the Glenburgie name, so it's under private collection. So it spent 19 years in an ex-sherry cask and then 20 years in a Burgundy cask. So when we talk about Gordon MacPhail, it's all about maturation. So if this cask had been Glenburgie in sherry or ex-sherry or ex-bourbon cask or remade hogsheads, it would be under Glenburgie. Because it's about a different type of cask, a Burgundy cask, we felt the fit was much better to be under Gordon MacPhail. So we've come out with a North American cask, there's a European cask, there's 5 casks that we bottled, so they're all been done as individual single casks. So some of it is on its way across the Atlantic at the moment, I think. So that, again, that's another interesting whiskey that comes out. So for us, it's all about this kind of unique and rare and different whiskies these days.
Yeah. Richard, I can feel James kind of sweating a little bit too, because he's probably worried that if the word gets out about these things too soon.
No, I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm okay.
Directions.
You have to remember there's always like a 6 to 8 month lag. So, I mean, even the things that I agreed to take today, you know, there's some cool stuff in there. There's a 2001 Tom and Toll from a refill cask. You know, there's a 2009 Speyburn. There's a 1983 Glenburgie. There's a 1977 Glenlivet. Like, there's always cool stuff. But it's a 6 to 8 month lag from, you know, when we hear about it, when it's actually, you know, being tasted on Zoom with Richard at 5 in the morning or whatever time it is there.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Richard, am I wrong? Is 82 your vintage or is it
81?
It's 81, right? I knew it was one of those two. So is there like any special 1981s coming out this year that you're excited about?
There actually isn't. It's 81's a pretty challenging year, as is 82 and 83 and 84 is the hardest year that we have in our portfolio. We have more stock from 1940 than we do from 1984, pretty much. That's how tough it is.
You know, it's funny because, like, I know with Glenfarclas, even another family business, like, I think 84 is a year where, like, they've only got 1 or 2 casks left of it. And I mean, that was kind of the cliff moment where a lot of the industry just kind of stopped. And, you know, does that have something to do with it? Just that there was not a lot of production those years?
So most of the large distilleries closed in 1983. So Glenburgie was one of those ones as well. So lots of distilleries closed down, less opportunity to purchase spirit from different distilleries. And as a result, we've got gaps in that kind of 80s in our portfolio. Particularly 1984 is a challenging year, looking at what we have available to us. And that's why some of our older whiskies, we have more experience, access to more spirit in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. So it's but unless someone's got a time machine and we can go back and change those decisions, we can't change that. But we can always make more whiskey that's 30 years old, but we can't go back in time and make more 30-year-old whiskies from 30 years ago. So once these casks are gone, that's the last chance you ever get a chance to try whiskies from that period.
Well, I think Kurt and I benefit from being just a few years older than you because we've had the great fortune of tucking away more than a few 78s over the years. So, yeah. Before we go
Actually,
on,
there's a 1981 whiskey coming out this year, 1981 Port Ellen, which is going to be one of the nicest whiskies. It's a global release, so it's coming out to the whole world. So, it is going to be coming out later in the year, and it's one of the best whiskies I ever tried. There you go. Thanks,
Richard. I don't know if you picked this up in the chat, but I'm just going to throw it out there. That happens to be James's birth year too. So,
Yeah, I knew we were.
Just gonna throw that out there. All right, just to keep things on track, let's move on to the Linkwood 88. This came in at the same time as the Mortlach in the fall last year. My initial reaction to these two was that I actually preferred the Linkwood, but I don't know how it can be better than the Mortlach that we just had. So I guess we're gonna have to find out and see if it still is, or if the Mortlach has risen up in our esteem. 1988 Mortlach, 55% after 32 years in a first fill sherry. Can't read it on the screen there, but there we go.
Yeah. So this one, obviously, the cask is twice the size of the previous of the Mortlach. So as a result, the flavor profile might not be quite as intense as what the Mortlach had, but it's still going to have a huge amount of sherry influence. So the Mortlach was a so a refill sherry and a first fill sherry, but you might find it actually more similar than I thought. So the bigger the cask, the slower the maturation we get. But being a first fill, you're going to get a lot more influence than a refill cask. So the Mortlach being half the size, being refill, you'll still get influence. And looking at the color, it's quite an active sherry cask. Whereas this one being a first fill, European oak, looking at the color, you're gonna get that nice kind of real richness coming through there as well.
It's funny, if I were to taste these two whiskeys side by side blind, and someone told me one's a Linkwood and one's a Mortlach, I would have it completely ass backwards. Because this to me is going in a bit more of a meaty direction than the Mortlach was. And it purely that could be down to just the style of the sherry cask and the way that the sherry cask matured the whiskey. But yeah, I find this one's a little deeper, a little richer, and a little more meaty. Kurt, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm the opposite of you on this one. I find it fruitier. I find it like chocolate trifle and a little bit more mincy, more stewed fruits, a little bit more like jammy berries. You know those boozy brandy cherries next door, Andrew? Yep. Got those on there too. And then the palate is so chocolatey. This is actually better than the Mortlach, I think. Sorry, in my opinion.
I thought that initially too when we tried them, and maybe it's just tonight, maybe it's just where my palate is today, but like I'm finding this is like I'm getting some of those same notes you talk about. I'm finding it's incredibly chocolatey. I'm getting loads of leather and tobacco, and just going back to the last one, it's just, to me, it's more, maybe it's a bit more delicate but exotically fruity, whereas this it's just classic raisins, dates, figs, and this meatier style of sherry to me.
It's one of those hard conversations when you're sitting here going, yeah, this one's better, but either one of these is like absolutely head and shoulders above anything else you're going to drink this month. You know what I mean?
But it's also quite nice that everyone likes different whiskies, because otherwise we could just have 7 bottles that taste exactly the same. So by having different flavors, it means we can have those discussions, because everyone does have different palates, and there's no right or wrong answer.
Did you ever read that forum, Connoisseur, Richard?
Don't think so, no.
And it was a whiskey forum, lots of chat. I remember an argument between two people about what was better between two whiskeys. And somebody else jumped in and said, don't you get it? It's good that we all like different things. Otherwise, we'd all be fighting over my wife. Well played, sir.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, Richard, I'd even say like there's some of this stuff to me is situational. Like my palate on different days is different, and it can be affected by even subtle things like the climate, like the weather, the humidity. When I tried these two whiskeys previously, I was like hands-on. The Linkwood is heads and tails better for me, but tonight it's not. I do want to quickly comment on the year 1988. Jeff Serger was born, so I guess that makes it pretty important. Calgary Winter Olympics, Eddie the Eagle Edwards. Very exciting times. We had a laser light show in downtown Calgary. It was like the highest technology anyone had ever seen, and it was just green lasers and minus 30. It was brutally cold winter. Yeah, and such a nostalgic year for me too, because I remember I got to see the Soviet Union play Sweden in hockey, and I was a little kid, and these giant guys in red uniforms came out with the CCCP on it, and I was just like, wow, those guys are our enemy. Like, it was such a different, bizarre time looking back. But yeah, great whiskey. And Hong Sang is 88, so we got a couple of 88s in tonight's tasting.
Are they old enough to drink, Andrew?
What's that?
Is that old enough to drink? Jeff, is hair coming in funny places now, buddy? You're just a babe.
They're pups. They're a couple of pups.
They are.
Yeah. Calgary even we had a basketball team for a while called the 88s because of the Winter Olympics. So anyway, very cool. All right, Richard, we're going on to the kind of the trilogy. I don't know if it was an official trilogy or an unofficial trilogy, but we've got 3 different 1990s, and they just happen to be the 3 principal malts in the Ballantine's blend. Is it a coincidence that you released them all at the same time?
It's just down to the cask being at their peak, and that's simple as that. And it was quite funny when I saw the cask that came out last year, and we offered them to different markets, and you don't get a chance to try them all before they go out to markets. It'd be amazing. I've got samples all over my desk now from stuff coming out this year, because it's quite good to see the whiskies before they actually head to market, so you can actually get a chance to just know what you're selling. And last year I missed out on all these dark shade whiskies before they actually got to market, so it's quite nice to get a chance to come back to them now and actually get the chance to try them, because otherwise they'd have been all gone.
Well, Richard, if you've not picked this up or learned it over time, my staff and I basically, our tastings are crafted around what we want to sample. And usually that's dictated by like things that we think are interesting and cool. So like you, we know things will sell whether we're there to sell them or not. But we'll definitely get involved if we feel things need to be included in a tasting just so we can try them.
Yeah. So I mean, we did our Glentauchers I mentioned earlier, 1979, and that's literally one of my favorite whiskies from the last kind of 5 years. So I've not really tried some great aged sherried Glentauchers before, so it's a new experience for me.
Mm-hmm. I've actually managed to put them all side by side on our site. So there they are, the Glentauchers, Glenburgie, and Miltonduff, Glenburgie, in the order we're pouring them and sampling them tonight as well. And these are all Sean's photos. So you can actually see like the color progression in them. The Glentauchers is just a touch lighter. The Glenburgie and the Miltonduff are really getting into that deep, dark sherry. So let's start off on the Glentauchers. And Richard, quickly going back to your comment about that 1979, I absolutely adore that cask. I think it's sold out, but I actually have at least 1 bottle tucked aside in my office for a future tasting, because that was just an incredibly gorgeous, I'm pretty sure it was a refill cask as well too, like a refill, really tropical old whiskey.
Yeah.
It's officially gone now too. No more coming.
Yeah, it was cask number 5339, so the sister cask is available now. That's a great thing about going through. We finish one cask, we can just go, oh, there's a sister cask. So that'll be potentially a US exclusive, but yeah, so that's yeah, we always have something close to what we did before.
Well, straight off the bat, we're into like kind of nutty, sherry, I mean, it smells, It's quite a departure from the last two. It's like a very dry, spicy style of sherry on the nose to me.
But with Linkwood, I always expect to get that kind of zesty orange note coming through. I actually get more of that zesty orange in this one than I did in the Linkwood.
Sunflower oil.
Yeah.
That might be kind of the nuttiness. It seems a little bit more muted than the last one. It's like everything the last one was, but a little bit of cream poured over it. Great palate though. Really antique on the palate.
It reminds me of my wife's vegetarian, so every once in a while we substitute Beyond Meat for actual meat, and it kind of reminds me on the nose of like grilling Beyond Meat in a frying pan with a little bit of oil.
Is that a good thing? Just curious.
I don't mind the stuff. The only bizarre part about it is it seems to smell the same way on the way in as it does on the way out, which is probably too much information, but fascinating that it's that consistent.
Okay. Old baseball glove on the nose. I like that note, Chris.
Yeah, the
So this
palate.
is-
Sorry, Richard, go ahead.
No, I was just saying it's a first fill sherry puncheon, so it's a slightly bigger cask as well. 505 bottles, still 53% alcohol. So we got a lot of volume out of that cask up to 30 years. We get about 600 bottles after 10 years, so another 2 decades on top of that, and we're still getting 505 bottles.
It's quite chewy. To me, this is like a classic old Christmas cake style single malt. It reminds me of Glenfarclas. Like my mind is going to Glenfarclas more than anything else on this one. And I don't know if it's because of that kind of oiliness that I'm perceiving mixed with the sherry and the spices, but yeah, this reminds me of like the old 25-year-olds.
You nailed it. I was wondering what it was for me. That's 100% what it is. Glenfarclas direct fires are washed still, right? And the finish of their whiskeys always has this like kind of grassy, slightly burnt grassy sort of note to it for me. I'm getting that here, almost tannic, quite herbal. Yeah, you nailed it. It's like Glenfarclas a lot on the palate.
It's great. Nose good, palate excellent. You know, we're the downside of a lineup like this is it's going to be very hard for the palate not to get exhausted by these big sherry notes in like successive whiskeys. So it'll be interesting to see how they stack up, because this is kind of like we've gone up with the Linkwood and we're down a little bit more. It's a bit spicier, a touch more tannic, still fresh. But we're about to start climbing again with these big, deep sherries. Oh, is that the Belle Blair?
No, that's our store cask of Mortlach that we sold through already, the 22, but it's like really clean ex-bourbon. It's a perfect palate cleanser between these. So I keep sipping that one as well.
Here I am like an idiot relying on a beer. Very cool. All right. How about we move on to the Glenburgie, because we don't want to keep Richard here all night. He's got to at least be ready to make his daughter breakfast when she gets up in an hour or so. All right, so I'll put this up on the
Fun-filled day or 9 o'clock meetings, always to another tasting tomorrow night as well. So it's going to be a long day.
It's going to be a long. Well, you're a trooper, sir. All right, this is the Glenburgie. I think we only have a bottle of this left. I was going to use the heel left over from the tasting samples to write a tasting note, and I started on that last night and then just decided to drink it. I didn't write a tasting note, so apologies, but we'll make do with the distillery one here. If you like this, there's literally one bottle left and then it's gone. And yeah, what have we got here? 52.9%, 31 years, first fill sherry, and part of the unofficial, unintentional, if you will, trilogy of Ballantyne's distilleries. And I'll put that up into the chat so you can see where it is. All right.
There's a bit of a fact between the two distilleries, kind of Glentauchers, Miltonduff, and Glenburgie. So I mentioned for Mortlach is a distillery label we've been using for well over 100 years. And for Linkwood, we do the same, and we use that distillery's original label from over 100 years ago. But for these three distilleries, Glentauchers, Miltonduff, Glenburgie, we created a label back in the 1990s, so not the 1890s. And those, we had permission to create labels by the brand owner back then. And that was what we used to bottle these whiskies up until, well, we still use, not for Miltonduff now, but for Glenburgie and for Glentauchers, we still use that label that we created back in the 1990s. Can you imagine today going to try a distillery going, hey guys, can I create a label for your distillery and use it? It would never ever happen. So it's quite nice that we had that relationship with the distilleries that we were able to do that. But also shows you that even going back 30 years ago, there wasn't that focus on single malt, there wasn't that demand, there wasn't the same kind of, well, interest, I guess, whereas today, obviously single malt is much more in demand.
Well, and the sad thing about that, Richard, is to my knowledge, Chivas has only once released official releases of these three malts. And, you know, they're still not a focus of their company. So it's kind of a shame. The other one that I think is worth noting that I love the simplicity of it is the Scapa label, which we haven't seen in some time. But like, it wasn't just like it's simple. It's just like a Viking ship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes we see some labels, so we can still use a Scapa one. But if we do 5 casks, we have a choice to make. We either do 5 casks at 46% under that label, or we do 5 casks under Conscious Choice and make them exclusive to our market. Quite interesting to get some feedback. Is it better to do them more at 46% and give the same allocation but from a batch release, or do it as a single cask at cask strength and then do it under the Conscious Choice label?
Yeah.
My vote is single cask.
Yeah, that's tends to be what we're getting. That's what we think, and that's what the market's telling us as well. So
couldn't you just cheekily do a cask strength distillery label?
I don't think so. It's down to our relationships with distilleries and what we said we would do at the time we started using them. It's all about respect. We don't own the brands. We have been given permission to use those labels for either decades or centuries in some cases. So how we can kind of make sure we still move that forward in a respectful manner is very much one of our kind of core values.
I love that.
All right, Kurt knows. What are you getting on this one?
So much of what we've had all the way through here. I pulled back for a sec. I thought I was getting a little bit of sulfur on this. I went through it a couple times, went back to a couple other whiskeys, and I think I am getting a wee little tiny bit of sulfur on here. Get a little bit more on the palate, but it's small and everything else in it is top notch. And this is the kind of sulfur I can live with.
To me, if that's what it is, it's coming across more as like a faint mustiness than it is sulfur, like that kind of old dunnagey warehouse, like kind of mushroomy notes. But I can see where you're going with that. This is like, it's syrupy, sweet, fruity, nutty, loads of chocolate. Similar to actually, to be honest, it's sort of somewhere in between the Mortlach and the Linkwood style-wise.
That's a good call.
But sweeter. Man, that is coming across, at least on my palate, as one of the sweetest whiskeys we've had in tonight's lineup.
So I think my brother must have gone to a Wrath the week before he did the cask selections that year. A lot of sherry cask coming out last year compared to some of our previous years.
Yeah, well, it works. You know, it's another great bottling. I don't know what more there is to say about that, but I know, and this is an interesting fact, we often make light of how far afield our guests are tonight. And normally we're lucky to go Victoria to maybe Halifax, although more often just Ontario or Quebec. But tonight we're actually stretching all the way to Vietnam, where Phil and Suzanne are. And the reason I'm bringing this up at this moment is This kind of seems to me like it would go with some like saucy Asian food. I don't know why. Maybe that's just what I want to eat right now, like something, you know, a little spicy and sweet with like a hoisin sauce. But yeah. Anyway, there's people who are tasting your whiskeys live with you tonight in Vietnam, Richard.
Yeah. So good to see you both as well. Hope you're enjoying your trip. And I'm sure I'll see you in person at one of the events later in the year.
Hong is asking if anybody has added water to their whiskey. I'm going to confess, I have not added water to any of these tonight. And the main reason I haven't is, well, A, they're all just drinking so well as it is. But I personally find older sherried whiskeys especially don't take water well. So I've not dabbled in that, but maybe somebody else has. And might want to chime in on this.
I mean, it is all about personal preference. So if you love the whiskey the way it is, when we do our kind of bottlings, they should be perfectly drinkable and palatable at cask strength. But everyone, as we just mentioned before, has different preferences. So, but as whiskey gets older, if you do add water, I just do it drop by drop. I wouldn't drown the whiskey, just do it very delicately, because sometimes you can drown the whiskey if it's particularly when it's a bit older.
Yeah, it's great. It's also reminding me of a candy that's a favorite of my mom's, which I haven't had in years. It's reminding me of those licorice goodies, like the candy coated licorice candies, which they're kind of addictive. They're a little bit like Parma Violets, but actually tasty. And once you start eating them, you can't stop. You have to finish the entire bag. It's physically impossible not to finish them. But Richard, before we move on to the next whiskey, as a Scottish person, I kind of want your ruling on this. Parma Violet candies, gross, yes or no?
Gross.
Yeah.
Not my thing.
But like addictive. Like if you have one, you kind of have to have a second, because you gotta stop it from getting to that soapy flavor. So you got to keep chasing the lavender to chase the soap away.
But I'm kind of guessing if maybe it's because you're from a decade before, maybe it was something about that decade and you like them for that. But the 80s, yeah, not a fan.
80s people have more restraint, I think, is what I'm hearing there. So it is the Thrills gum of Scotland, Jake. That is correct. All right. Final whiskey, and then we're going to go through and do our speed round. We're on to the Miltonduff. Miltonduff has long been one of my favorite distilleries, which, you know, I suppose maybe, you know, if at some point, Richard, there's an opportunity on a Miltonduff, we might be interested, because I've been a fan, and it doesn't need to be big dark sherry. I'm actually a fan of some of those refill, like the one we had before this, that 1989 Miltonduff. I'm a huge fan of. I love that style. But we've got something a little deeper, darker, and richer here. Oof.
Yeah. Just looking for you to see if I can wind James up again. I'm saying, yeah, I can give you that cast too, and see James pull more hair out.
Oh man, this is like Aussie licorice on the nose, fig jam. It is so much like stewed fruit as well.
So there's a key thing about all our casks. Most companies 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago were filling their casks to be blended, not to bottle them as single malt. For us, we were always filling casks to be single malt, which means that we now have the ability to bottle all these casks in their own right. They're the right quality to be single casks. I'm not saying blended whiskey is a bad thing by any means, but if you're bottling 50 casks at a time, you have the ability that casks can be kind of consumed by the other cask flavors. But if you do it as a single cask, it has to be the right quality. Otherwise, it's just not a great product. So for us, it's always been about maturing for single malt, which means today we've got this ability that we can do 400 single casks a year, and we know that the quality is there for the casks that we have. With Miltonduff, we used to do two different types of fillings from there, and the same with Glenburgie as well. So we had Glenburgie, we used to fill Glen Craig as well. And at Miltonduff, we used to do Mistowie, which is the little kind of village next to Miltonduff. And they were different spirit styles. But because they aren't made anymore, the only distilleries we have, the only spirit we have left now in our warehouse is from Miltonduff. We don't have any of that Mistowie left at all now. And we can't go back and make more of it. So, and the distillery itself is getting big investment at the moment from Chivas, so it's going to be increasing capacity. Visitor center things going in there as well, and it'll be quite a different site going forward. But that won't impact what we're drinking for another 10, 15 years, 20 years maybe.
Richard, does that mean that it's likely that you might even fill more Miltonduff if their production is going up that much?
It depends. I mean, there's so many different factors in terms of, can we get our casks? Because we want to fill our casks, we don't want to buy a cask, we want to fill by the spirit. Can we get our casks in to be filled is one of the challenges. The other one is, are they going to have a single malt strategy in the future, and they don't want to have other independent bottlers bottling single malt from that distillery name in the future as well? So it could be a company decision, it could be a capacity decision as well. So the answer is, I don't know if that will change or not.
Yeah.
The family motto is plan for the worst and hope for the best. Hence, we now have 2 distilleries because we're planning for having no whiskey from the third-party distilleries in the future, but we're hoping, obviously, that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, Kurt, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, this one's wicked. I go back to the last one, I still get a little bit of sulfur there, especially when I compare it to this one. But this is like, you brought it, I think, to my attention earlier, Andrew. It's got those notes of like hoisin or something, a little bit savory going on behind it, like grapefruit tones, a little bit like sweet and sour kind of in a way. Yeah, right in my wheelhouse for the big sherry bombs this time. Love it.
Yeah.
I like the comments that came out too there. James and Chris back to back had a couple of great ones. James said, even amongst these big sherry bombs, this Miltonduff has a certain authority. Perfect placement at the end. 100% agree. And Chris, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's a bit of like a mic drop at the end of the tasting.
It kind of is, right?
We're done. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
And then Chris said, if a whiskey could be described as sonorous, it would be the Miltonduff. Love it.
I'm just thinking that we should get Kurt to Scotland to write our tasting notes for us.
Wow. Brilliant.
Richard, I was just thinking, I don't think we've been offered a single cask of Miltonduff in our market. How is there a reason for that?
Just down to my bad selection of where it's at. But
I mean,
it's easily remedied.
I was going to say there's a couple of us that are going to be visiting in the next month or so. If you have anything lying around, please let us know.
Yeah,
maybe
I mean,
2003 Miltonduff. Just throw that out there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can do that for you. So again, now it's recorded. Now I have to do that. So yeah, so Miltonduff we've got good stocks of. We use quite a lot of it for our discovery range right now. So a set strength product. So, but that means there's stock that can be potentially reallocated to other uses. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very cool, Dram. All right, this is the speed round. Now, Kurt, it might just be you and I on this, just quickly riffing on each whiskey, and then we'll have our vote. Maybe share our own personal favorites in this, but let's go all the way back to the Highland Park, 1988. The nose on that now is like going into an old-fashioned ice cream shop for me.
My glasses are nearly empty, but if you look at them, you guys are probably the same. They're like so white and oily. That's gorgeous. It's incredible. So they should still hold up. Let's do it.
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
Kurt, were you ever lucky enough to try the Highland Park 40 year?
Yeah, I still have a big chunk of it.
It's not the same, but it's going in that direction. Like it was such a delicate, light, fresh, fruity, honeyed malt. And this has just faint twinges of that for me. It's like it's its younger brother or sister.
get a little bit of leather now, and it's kind of leaning more into the tropical on the palate than I found it in the first place. I love that. You know that. I chase that.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Showing really well still. All right, Pulteney.
What a nose, like creamy and custardy still. It's like such a perfect marriage of fruits. It's actually hard to pull them apart, but they're all soft fruits.
Nice polished oak. It's waxy, salty, salted caramel, loads of orchard fruits, going a little tropical. That's gorgeous too, and such a different style from that Highland Park. Man,
It's that tangy back end of it. It's kind of into a little bit of grapefruit and stuff going on there. I love that.
the finish on this thing won't quit either. And that's saying something after we've just had 5 big sherried whiskeys to like wear out your palate, that it's still that big, that tangy, and has that kind of a finish on it. Beauty. All right, Mortlach.
Smells like something baking in the oven, something that's almost a little bit savory, but you know is still gonna be sweet.
Oh, I know exactly what it is. It's those, do you remember back when Peasant used to sell those chocolate brioche loaves?
Yep, I do.
And like you get that warm with some French butter on it. And I mean, what more do you want?
I'm getting a bit of a waxiness on the palate this time around that I don't remember the first time.
Mhm. I mean, we've still got to go through the last 4 again, but for me, that's got kind of the sherry profile that I like the most in that it's not too overpowering. It's allowing those delicate fruity tones to shine through. It's really, really pretty. All right, Linkwood.
Okay, so this one leans more into what I look for. I get a little bit more balance here between spirit and wood. I get more fruits going on. Jammier.
Man. I'm coming back around on this one. I still don't know if I like it more than the Mortlach or not, but another great sherried whiskey. To me, it is more Mortlach style than what I would think of as a classic Linkwood style. It just seems to have that little bit of meaty tones to it. But it is another beautiful malt.
I think
I'll add to this, Andrew. If you put the 25-year-old distillery label, Mortlach and Linkwood, beside each other, they compare very similar to the way these two compare.
I'll have to do that again because I've always thought of Mortlach, especially in sherry, as being that bit more robust, muscular style. And Linkwood to me has always had this kind of pillowy, soft, floral kind of tone to it. Now, obviously the sherry cask is going to speak a lot for them as well too, but yeah, it just to me and everything I've tasted over the years, it tastes more Mortlach-y to me than it does Linkwood. But
well, I will say on the back half of this year, there's going to be lots more distillery label Mortlach and Linkwood in Alberta. So
cool. Well, we won't be disappointed about that. Kurt, you were going to finish on something there.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think Richard said it earlier, relating when we were talking about the next whiskey, but relating back to this, I get a lot of like orange oil here, like orange zest, or a lot of orangey notes on this one, which I usually find a ton of on Glentauchers, but definitely on Linkwood too.
Like maybe like a bit of Murphy's, what was that? Murphy's oil soap, the stuff the old ladies would polish the church pews with. If it's good enough for our house, it's good enough for yours. I think
that's right.
All right, Glentauchers, the Glenfarclas-y one.
It doesn't nose like a Glenfarclas though.
No,
it's holding up well. It's a little bit hot cross bunsy on the nose for me now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was ginger on the tasting note for that one. So,
Kurt, I love that hot cross buns note for the nose for sure. It's still reminiscent to me of Glenfarclas on the palate. Maybe not as much as when we went through it the first time. But it's a great cask. Not over the top sherried. It's got a nice balance to it too. A little drying, Loads of spice, like Richard said, sort of ginger cinnamon tones coming through as well. All right, Glenburgie.
Yeah, still getting that sulfur note on there.
And for me, I don't know, I still find it more denagey than sulfur. I'm getting more like cold tea leaf kind of tones from it, and like wet leaf litter than I am going into that sort of sulfur note.
Like the wet tea leaf note. That's a good note.
But still nice spices, nice balance. I like it. Well, I mean, Christ, I'd happily drink any of these tonight. But I do enjoy that. Miltonduff, last one.
There's really drops left in this one. I'm sad. Oh man, more tobacco. There's like, it doesn't have the Spanish cedar kind of note, but it has everything else about walking into a good humidor.
Yeah, I like it. It's well put together. It's the full package. But to me, going back, I think my votes would be weighted more towards, if we're talking just sherry, the Mortlach and the Linkwood. Like, to me, especially going through a second time, those two really stood out. And I shouldn't say more because I don't want to like influence the votes, but yeah.
Or sorry, I guess Richard would probably be the authority on this one. Was this a hoggy? I can't remember on the Miltonduff.
So Miltonduff, I'll just double check. Yeah, no, sherry butts.
Sherry
Mortlach was a hogshead.
Yeah, I can get some bourbony kind of notes on the palate of that one actually.
I know, but yeah, the Mortlach would have been sherry hogshead though, so it would have been an original kind of cut down sherry butt into a hogshead, so it'd have been European oak, and but for me, I think the like that Pulteney. Maybe it's the time of day. Maybe it's all about the situation I'm in at the moment. The breakfast time is coming up before dinner time for me, and a nice breakfast whiskey, that lighter tropical flavor profile.
Well, on that note, we're going to let the poll run for a few minutes here. I've just put it out there. So, we'd like to let Richard get on with his day because it is tomorrow where he is. So if you can all get in there quickly, I can see about a quarter of you have voted so far, which is great. Maybe we'll let James say a word or two about fun things that are trickling into the market in the months ahead while we're letting some of those votes percolate, and then I'll get each of you guys to share your favorites. Careful, James, you don't want that whole thing on Facebook, do you?
No, I know, right? This is half of the list of Gordon and MacPhail products that is available in Alberta. Each one of those lines is a different product. It's pretty wild, but it's exciting times. I look at the order that's landing in 2 or 3 weeks from now, and Andrew has a Ben Romick. As far as I know, the oldest Ben Romick cask that I've ever seen bottled landing.
It's gorgeous.
A 33-year-old Bladnock that just blew me away with its tropical fruit and honey notes. There's just, and then of course the closed distillery range. There's just it's good time to be connected to Gordon MacPhail, and we're very thankful that Richard keeps coughing up all this awesome stuff for us. So
no, it's I'm very grateful to all you guys on the screen, and to you, James, but also to Andrew and Kurt, the Kensington team, because you guys are really making my job and my life really easy these days by the orders that are coming in. So thank you all for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of these things, people often talk to me about our business, and a lot of this comes down to relationships. And, I've had a great relationship with Gordon MacPhail going back to your Uncle Michael, like well over 20 years this fall. I'll have, known and been doing business with Gordon MacPhail, and Authentic Wine and Spirits has been a great partner of mine. And then James, when he came on as well, like for more than a decade, I've had a great relationship there. And a lot of these things are, it's never one-sided, it's mutually beneficial. And certainly we appreciate the opportunity to get products like this, but also to have your time. I mean, for you to get up either early or stay up late, whichever it was, you know, we certainly don't take that for granted.
This is quite easy for me though, because I mean, I remember being up in Alaska and then coming to Vancouver, and then not even get to bed for a whole night and having to do a whole day in the market, followed by meetings and then a dinner. And then that was probably the hardest day I've had because I didn't get any sleep at all that day. So this will be easy. I'll get 4 hours and I'll be fine.
All right, I want to talk about my favorites in a minute, so we're going to give you 1 more minute. If you haven't put your favorites in the poll, you have 1 minute, and we're going to share the results there. But since most people have voted, James, I might start with you. If you had to pick 2 favorites from tonight's lineup, what would they be?
Well, I think, you know, in a lineup like this, like that Miltonduff, again, it does stand above the rest. But what I've learned is that sometimes the ones that are big and stick out in these lineups aren't necessarily what you go to if you have it at home. So I think the one that I would go back to if it was on my own shelf is that 82 Pulteney. That just, you know, had a little twist of something that really pulled me in.
Cool. And
those were the 2 that stood out to me.
Oh, those are your 2 favorites. All right. Now, Richard, I realize you might not have tried all of these tonight with us, but you've probably tried most of them. Going from memory, what would your 2 favorites be?
That'd be the 82 Pulteney and the 89 Mortlach.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Kurt?
82 Pulteney, 88 Linkwood.
I'm so close to you and Richard. I'm a bit of a twist on it. That 82 Pulteney for me stole the show tonight. You know, despite all that big, gorgeous sherry we had, that is an absolutely stunning whiskey. And my number 2 is going to go to the Mortlach as well. I'm gonna side with Richard on that one. I think that Mortlach 89 is just perfect for sherry. It's tropical, it's sweet, it's fruity, but it's not over the top. And yeah. All right, I'm going to share the results of the votes here. So you can see how everyone else voted in tonight's poll. And looking for favorites here, it's going to be tight. We've got Miltonduff winning round 1. So kind of going more in James's direction on that. The Pulteney 82 did well. The Linkwood 88 did well. And then for second favorite whiskey, we had Linkwood 88 storming to the front with the Highland Park Pulteney Mortlach and Miltonduff 1990 tied for second. I think if we're going to give it to one malt tonight based on these votes, I think people sided with Kurt. The Linkwood took it, followed by the Miltonduff, and I think the Pulteney probably comes in third there. So there you have it. Absolutely incredible range. Richard, as always, thank you for doing this. Thank you for your time. I do think it's worth noting Authentic Wine and Spirits helped with the cost of this tasting. It would have been more if it wasn't for the support of James and his team. So big shout out and thank you to James and Authentic. This was a fun.
I'm spending Richard's money, so it's all good.
Well, it's that's a nebulous.
It's worth it. So
it is worth it. Well, you know, one of the things we talk about in the shop is it's one thing to just put these things on our website or on the shelf and sell them. But one of the cool things about doing events like this, doing tastings in store, is that some of these, what are now increasingly old and rare and special bottles, get opened and people enjoy them together, whether in person or virtually like this, and create a sense of community through the chat or through conversation. And that's to me what this is all about. So I want to thank Kurt for being in here with me tonight. Thank James as well, and Richard for staying up late. I guess we'll see you in a couple of weeks, not even a couple of weeks.
We'll get you around the new distillery, get you around there you see we're doing, try Miltonduff and some other stuff as well. So, but just want to say thank you, Andrew, for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be here. Thanks, James, for putting this on from the authentic side, and thanks to you all here for being here as well. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to hopefully being invited back to do another tasting.
And, you know, my only disappointment is that Evan's not here tonight and I can't introduce you to him.
I know I've been looking forward to meeting Evan for a long time, and just never had the opportunity to meet him yet.
We'll remedy that. Well, Richard, James, Kurt, everyone, thank you very much. Phil and Suzanne, thanks for enjoying whiskeys with us over breakfast in Vietnam. And everybody else, hope you stay well. Thanks for tuning in. I see we got the Cornwall crew in the house as well too. So out in Ontario. Everyone, you have a great night. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking part in the tasting. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye.